Okay. Hi, I'm Jamie.
I'm Kate.
And we're here to talk about part 3 of Gone with the Wind. We're going to start with chapter 17 and get right into it. So chapter 17 starts in May of 1864, and the war is drawing much closer to Atlanta.
So one of the Rhett Butler's visiting off and on when he's in town, and there's this quote that we liked. It says, Rhett Butler lounged in the shadows, his long legs and their elegant boots crossed negligently, his dark face an unreadable blank. In his arms, Wade slept contentedly, a cleanly picked wishbone in his small hand. Scarlett always permitted Wade to sit up late when Rhett called because the shy child was fond of him, and Rhett, oddly enough, seemed to be fond of Wade. Generally, Scarlett was annoyed by the child's presence, but he always behaved nicely in Rhett's arms. I just think we like that because it just showed that sort of a fatherly love for Wade, and just that they're talking about Wade like he's a human person that's alive.
He exists. Yes, I'm so glad to finally hear about him.
And so this section also starts where Aunt Pitty decides that she's going to have company over because all of the chickens but the one rooster has been eaten, and they're going to celebrate their last feast, basically, of chicken. And she's kind of feeling bad that other people in the town don't have anything, so she's going to have some people over. Melanie is nervous about having company because she's expecting, and she doesn't want to see people since that was sort of taboo in that time, which we can talk about later. And then Rhett shows up unannounced, and they of course can't turn him away because that would not be Southern hospitality. So he comes for dinner. And then there's this whole conversation between Rhett and Scarlett that's just hilarious.
Yes.
I have to grab my book. So it starts with this section starts with Rhett saying, they're talking about the Yankees. I bet you they will be here within the month. I'll bet you a box of bonbons against his dark eyes wandered to her lips against a kiss. And so he's betting her that they'll be there. And she says, I don't care for such personal conversation. Besides, I'd just as soon kiss a pig. And he says, there's no accounting for tastes, and I've always heard the Irish were partial to pigs. Kept them under their beds, in fact. But Scarlett, you need kissing badly. That's what's wrong with you. All your beaux have respected you too much, though God knows why, or they have been too afraid of you to really do right by you. The result is that you are unendurably uppity. You should be kissed, and by someone who knows how. The conversation was not going the way she wanted it. It never did when she was with him. Always, it was a duel in which she was worsted. And I suppose you think you are the proper person? She asked with sarcasm, holding her temper in check with difficulty. Oh yes, if I cared to take the trouble, he said carelessly. They say I kiss very well. So, and then he goes on to talk about how he never fancied kissing children, meaning that Scarlett is still a child and she needs to grow up.
Yeah, he said that she wants to grow up. Okay. So we're talking about, it's getting to more of the war. It talks about the dead and the wounded at New Hope Church, which is a city, right? Ran high. The hospitals had overflowed, and the wounded lay on the floors of empty stores and upon cotton bales and warehouses. No one had lost faith in the invincibility of the troops, but everyone, the civilians at least, had lost faith in the general. So we know that the men can still fight. So Scarlett was getting sick of all the nursing, the foul smells, the lice, the aching, unwashed bodies. This is funny. She says, these men wounded in the retreat were not so attractive as the earlier ones had been. They didn't show the slightest interest in her and very little to say. So it wasn't really fun anymore.
Yeah, I think there are a few other things on their mind.
Yeah. So she decides she's going to sneak out of the hospital. And so she does. And she sees Rhett driving by. So she gets in his carriage and tells him to take her far away from the hospital.
Escape.
You get out and help me in and drive me somewhere where nobody will see me. I won't go back to the hospital if they hang me. My goodness, I didn't start this war, and I don't see any reason why I should be worked to death. So she's done with that. So as they're driving, it's interesting, they see a crowd of men coming down the street, some of the slaves, so it's kind of different to see them in the streets, and they're singing Go Down Moses. I don't know if you've ever heard that song. Go down Moses, way down in the Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Anyway, our mom
We're looking at you, Mom.
sings that. Used to sing that in a really deep baritone voice. So, just thinking of her when I saw that quote. And anyway, those men were coming to dig rifle pits, preparing for a siege in Atlanta. So,
Which kind of makes me nervous. Like they're getting even closer. 'Cause
Yes.
This whole time I'm like, it's
yeah,
so close.
it seems so close, miles and miles away, only a few miles away, but it still feels like it takes forever for them to get there. So.
Right. So then we move into chapter 18. And this is, for the first time since the war began, Atlanta could hear the sound of battle. So now they're like, it's close enough that they're hearing it. It's 5 miles away. Atlanta is crowded with visitors, refugees, families of wounded men in hospitals, wives and mothers of soldiers fighting. It just feels like pandemonium or chaos. Scarlett is now 19, which still boggles my mind because she's married, widowed, has a child, like just all this.
Yeah.
She's so young.
Yeah, so young.
It says, widowhood and motherhood weighed less heavily on her. Between hospital duties and parties at night, she hardly ever saw Wade. Sometimes she actually forgot for long stretches that she had a child. Which was why it was so interesting to hear her talk about him with Rhett earlier.
That's very interesting.
A steady stream of men made their way into the town, wounded and thirsty. Aunt Pitty's house was one of the first that they reached, and so their lawn was covered with prostrate men, too tired to walk, too weak from their wounds to move, and so they're just constantly nursing anybody that stops by.
Just out there on the lawn. I feel like you could just see them all lined up, and they're just bringing them what they need to take care of them.
They're just everywhere.
Yeah.
And so she realizes that this is what Ashley meant when he had wrote that war was not glory, but dirt and misery.
Yeah. I think she's seeing the dirty, yucky side of it now. Yeah.
It's becoming more real, and I feel like we've talked about this part 3 being a turning point for her, and I just feel like she's getting to that point where her opinions are changing a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
So here's another quote. The crowd cheered the troops as they would have cheered them in victory. There was fear in every heart, but now that they knew the truth, now that the worst had happened, now that the war was in their front yard, a change came over the town. There was no panic now, no hysteria. Whatever lay in hearts did not show on faces. Everyone looked cheerful, even if the cheer was strained. Everyone tried to show brave, confident faces to the troops. Everyone repeated what old Joe had said just before he was relieving command. I can hold Atlanta forever. So many women decide to flee from Atlanta to other nearby towns, and Aunt Pitty decides to go to Macon to stay with her cousin, Mrs. Burr. And Scarlett doesn't want to go, and decides to go back to Tara. But Melly doesn't want to leave, doesn't want to be left alone with Aunt Pitty, and so she convinces Scarlett eventually to stay with her there. The doctor refuses to allow Miss Melly to go anywhere in her condition. So they both decide to stay in Atlanta where they can be near the doctor when the time comes. So that Scarlett talks to the doctor about this, and they kind of have this banter, and I just really enjoyed their conversation because he is so straightforward. Like, no, she can't leave. He's bossy, and he encourages and emboldens her to stay and take care of Melanie. In her time of need, and that was the right thing to do. So this just caused me to think, were there cesareans in that time? Because they talk about how Melanie was so little and she had narrow hips and like she shouldn't even have a baby.
Right.
And so I just did a really short research, but from what I could tell, there were not. They had been doing cesareans for many hundreds of years, but they were not widely available, and many doctors didn't do it. I mean, surgery in general, especially abdominal, was just not done. So no. But I did find this quote from the National Institute of Health website. There was a pamphlet about the history of cesareans, and I just thought this was interesting. It says, in obstetrics, though, there was opposition to its use based on the biblical injunction that women should sorrow to bring forth children in atonement for Eve's sin. This argument was substantially demolished when the head of the Church of England, Queen Victoria, had chloroform administered for the births of 2 of her children, Leopold in 1853 and Beatrice in 1857. Subsequently, anesthesia in childbirth became popular among the wealthy and practical in cases of cesarean section. So
Interesting. That is about this.
I'd like to know more about Victoria, which always just surprises me how things come full circle because I'm reading a book on Victoria right now. So it'll be interesting if they should mention that in this book.
Yeah.
And then I'm a little bit shocked that Aunt Pitty Pat leaves them and she decides to go to Macon without them. But I guess her fear of the war overshadowed them.
Yeah, she was worried about herself at that point.
Yeah. And later, of course, she gets mad that they're not there with her when she gets back. But,
Right.
Yeah.
Full circle. Chapter 19. So we're at the point now where Melanie's baby is getting close to coming, and Scarlett's worried that the baby might arrive at any moment. And what would she do if the baby started coming? She knew she'd rather let Melanie die than go out on the streets to hunt for the doctor when the shells were falling like April rain. And she knew Prissy could be beaten to death before she would venture for it. So what would she do if the baby came? Prissy assures Scarlett that she can handle it because her mom was a midwife and she'd been trained too. So Scarlett gradually draws courage from the brave faces of her friends and from the merciful adjustment which nature makes when what cannot be cured must be endured. And we were talking about how this was like a turning point for Scarlett when nothing can cure it, nothing can make it better. So you just have to get through it, endure it.
Yeah.
So to be sure, she still jumped at the sound of explosions, but did not run screaming to bury her head under Melanie's pillow. She could now gulp and say weakly, that one wasn't close, was it? That one wasn't so close, was it? So she wasn't quite as that startled reflection. Startled reaction. It says Scarlett feels like she's in a dream. The constant barrage of the noises of war and men coming and asking for food and water and shelter. She can't believe this is happening to her, Scarlett O'Hara.
It is quite different from the way she was, living before.
Yeah. Her father writes a letter, and he's telling her, he wrote for 3 pages about the gallantry of the troops, and then at the end of his letter, he briefly mentioned that Corrine, her sister, was ill. The typhoid, Mrs. O'Hara said it was. She was not very ill, and Scarlett was not to worry about her. But on no condition must she come home. So they didn't want her to come home, fear that she would probably get ill. Her mother encourages her to pray for Corrine, who is ill with typhoid. She has comments about how God was not watching out for her. Like Scarlett would talk about how she prayed, or she didn't want to pray, I guess, because God wasn't there for her. He wasn't there for the Confederates or the South, or even though everyone was praying daily, she just wasn't feeling his presence, which I'm sure we can understand.
And her prayers weren't being answered in the way she wanted them to be.
Exactly. She wanted everything to be better, like we always do, but it's not going to happen in that way.
She wasn't seeing all of the blessings he was, the protection that he was providing for them. And,
right.
We miss the blessings all the time.
Yeah, because you're always like, oh, woe is me, and if I only, exactly. So during this time, I felt like this is like in the waiting of the baby to come, and just, they're just kind of waiting. Scarlett is lonely, and she says it was not often that she was alone like this, and she did not like it. When she was alone, she had to think. You remember how she always says, I'll think about that another day. And these days, thoughts were not so pleasant. Like everyone else, she had fallen into the habit of thinking of the past, the dead. So she's sitting out on the porch, and Rhett stops by, and of course, they start to banter.
Like always.
And let's see. They're going at it, and Rhett talks about, he says, dear, he said quietly, I'm complimenting your intelligence by asking you to be my mistress without having first seduced you. So she had said something about, are you asking me to marry you? And he said, good Lord, no. Didn't I tell you I wasn't a marrying man? He said, this is what I'm asking you. I'm asking you to be my mistress. And then he says, what would I get out of marrying her except a passel of brats? So I guess just like her, just like what she is.
And she talks about how she just says things without really thinking about the proper thing that her mother taught her.
She just gets angry, especially with him. I think he's so clever with what he says to her, and it feels like he's just always got these little comebacks or these little digs, and she just gets so mad.
Yeah.
And thinking about Melanie's pregnancy, it talks about how embarrassed they were talking about it and being seen. Like we talked about how Melanie didn't want to be seen. Right. So then we looked into that a little bit.
I just wanted to find out why specifically they didn't go out in public or want to be seen.
Yeah.
From the Maryland Center for History and Culture, this article about the Victorian image of pregnancy through corsetry. This is more about the corsets that they wore, which they wore, during pregnancy, they had maternity corsets, and they didn't lace up the back, they laced up on the side so they could extend it out.
Right.
But they kept them like pretty tight, even still to hide it.
Yeah.
So the first thing was that they lost independence. So like the working class women would not be able to work because they took longer, they were tired. Women are supposed to be in bed rest, so for the upper classes they should have been in bed all this time. And so the longer they were to hide their pregnancies, the longer they could work and provide for their families.
Right.
Or stay out and be social if they were the upper class.
Right.
So, but I'll read this little portion. It says, in addition to independence, Victorian society's expectation pressured women to continue wearing corsets through pregnancy. Victorian society depicted a perfect woman as meek and virtuous, even when they're married. And because pregnancy proved women were not these demure creatures, they were expected to hide their pregnancies from public eye to avoid any discomfort for others. Along with virginity and innocence, women were valued for femininity. During this era, femininity was based on a woman's tiny waist, which is why she's always commenting on that. I have the smallest waist in this county. Because a woman's abdomen grew with pregnancy, many women felt they lost their youth and beauty in the eyes of society. In a desperate attempt to hold on to her femininity, she simply continued donning her corsets to create the illusion of a small waist and therefore beauty.
Yeah, now we look at pregnancy like, well, you want to show it. Like you wear these clothes so that your belly is like, and people wear, things to show their belly. Yeah. Which I think is a little much, but it's a beautiful thing because there's life in there. So it's just such a dramatic difference. I would hate that, to feel like you're not beautiful just because you created life. Like this is what you were made to do. So
and everybody knows this is a product of marriage.
Yes.
Like it's not like we don't know this. So why are we trying to hide something?
Yeah, it's so wild. But you're right. I guess if that's the beauty and the waist and I can't imagine wearing that corset. And
I'm just glad that that's changed.
Not anymore, exactly.
And then at the end of this chapter, they argue some more.
Yeah.
So
always arguing.
Same as always.
Same story, different day.
So chapter 20. August in Atlanta became very quiet. There's 30 days of siege, and word did come that the Yankees had not gotten to Tara. There's a letter from Gerald that Ellen and both the girls have typhoid now. And what I thought was interesting was that his letter, there was no paper. He couldn't get paper, so his letter is written in between the lines of her last letter. So that was fascinating.
Yeah, very,
And then later they talk about homemade ink and all kinds of stuff.
Ways to reuse and recycle. They were just doing it.
Exactly. And so then they've asked Scarlett to pray, and so she does, and it just ends up being this thing where she's bargaining like normal with God. Please, I'll be good if you don't take them from me.
Right.
She says, Mother of God, don't let her die. I'll be so good if you don't let her die. Please don't let her die. So
I'll be so good.
Yeah, I'll be good. Doesn't work like that, Scarlett. So I feel like a theme of this whole part is just her relationship with Ellen and motherhood, and we could go into so much of that because she's so scared with Ellen being ill. What is she gonna do? And I'm sitting here thinking she's a widow with a child, and she's still just longing for her mom, which
she's still
I can relate to that even now.
Yeah, even as an adult in the middle, just 30s and 40s, But she's still a child. I mean, like 19, not a child, but she's still so young.
Right.
So and her mom was just the mainstay.
Yeah. So, and then she goes on to talk more about Melanie, and she just going back and forth between. Like almost like I wish Melanie would die and I wouldn't have to take care of her. She's like this burden, but then how could I do that? That's so sinful to like have those thoughts. And I wish Ashley were here, but she just this internal struggle that I could so relate to when you're just in that stressful mindset.
Right.
Melanie asks Scarlett to take her baby if she should die, and Melanie's like feeling like labor pains are starting. She feels like the baby's gonna come anytime. So
chapter 21, we find that Melanie is in fact in labor, and there's no doctor or other women around. It's hard to find anybody help. The Dr. Mead, her main doctor, is helping the men, and he says she finds him, and he's helping the soldiers and stuff, and like, a baby, I can't do that right now. Like, I can't deal with that. Find somebody else. So they're still constantly worried about the Yankees coming to Atlanta. They keep saying, the Yankees are coming, the Yankees are coming. So Scarlett, at the end of this chapter, it just concludes that Scarlett and Prissy are going to have to deliver this baby.
Mm-hmm. And then moving on to chapter 22.
Yes. Find chapter 22.
It's Melanie's getting ready to have the baby, and it's just stifling hot. I mean, she's talking about the sheets are soaked, and Melanie's writhing, and it's so hot. And
they're just stuck in that room. I feel like
Yeah.
nobody left the room. They were just all in this room, and I felt like it probably seemed dark and just
stuffy.
Yeah, right. So in the end, I mean, she does have the baby, so they go through all this. Melanie was not dead, and the small baby boy, who made noises like a young kitten, was receiving his first bath at Prissy's hands, and Melanie had fallen asleep. The soldiers were retreating now, so they're freaking out. They're worried. The Yankees are coming. The soldiers are leaving. She suddenly thinks of Rhett Butler, and the calm dispelled her fears. Like, why didn't I think of him before?
Right.
She hated him, she says, but he was strong and smart, and he wasn't afraid of the Yankees. So she tells Prissy to go find him.
Yep.
And then chapter 23, Rhett does come with a wagon and a horse. And of course, Scarlett's idea is that she wants to go take Melanie and the baby and Prissy and go to Tara. There's fighting happening all around them, but we're going to go. She wants to go home. Rhett thinks this is crazy for her to try to go to Tara with all the fighting. And she says, I will go home. I will. And she says, you can't stop me. I want my mother. I'll kill you if you try to stop me. And suddenly she gets so upset that she's in his arms. And he's soothing her, there, darling. He says, don't cry. You shall go home. Don't cry. He's always so calm. Like when he showed up with the horse and the wagon, he's like, good weather we're having here. And here you're taking a trip. He's just always that's why I say he always has the right thing to say.
Yeah.
So they gather Melanie and the baby and some belongings. I don't know how to say this word. How would you say this word?
Daguerreotype?
Daguerreotype, which is like a photograph taken by an early photographic process with iodine, sensitized silver plate, and mercury vapor. So Melanie, before they got her up out of the bed, because she's just given birth, she was very, very sick at this point. She wanted that picture of Charles and his sword. So they made sure they got those things. And then, so they're going along in the wagon. They're starting to travel, and Rhett says something about he has like a gun on him or whatever, a pistol. So if somebody comes up on her side of the wagon, Scarlett's right in front with them, I'm assuming, that for her to grab it. And she says, well, I have Charles' pistol. And he's like, Charles? And she's like, Charles, my husband. Was he really your husband? And she's like, I have a son. And he's like, well, there's more ways to do that than a husband. Anyway, they have this little banter, of course, again.
Yeah.
And then they stop at some point, and Rhett says, I'm leaving you. You're going to go alone. And she's like, I'm going to do this alone? Why are you leaving? They kind of have this long discussion, and he says he's going to fight in the war. He's finally going to fight in the war. And he says, they kind of are talking about it, and he says, you're selfish to the end, aren't you, my dear? Thinking only of your own precious hide and not of the gallant Confederacy. And then he tells her, dear Scarlett, you aren't helpless. Anyone as selfish as you are is never helpless. God help the Yankees if they should get you. So he's trying to like encourage her, like, you can do this. I feel like he's, saying she can do this. And
if he can go off and do what he didn't want to against his thoughts from before,
she can do this.
Yeah.
He ends up saying, I love you, Scarlett. And he tells her, because we're so much alike. We're renegades, both of us, dear, and selfish rascals. Neither of us cares a rap if the whole world goes to pot, so long as we are safe and comfortable. So he's putting himself in there with her, selfish, he sees they're so much alike in that way.
Yeah.
So that's, so then that ends 23, they're headed to Tara, the 3 women, and the babies.
Yeah. Chapter 24. This is where the title of the book comes in, which I just love. But it starts off, they're on their way to Tara, and she's still wondering. And so she says, was Tara still standing, or was Tara also gone with the wind, which had swept through Georgia? And so I'm like, I just picked up on that real quick, like, that's the title. And I can't remember what her title she said was original, but anyway.
Something about with tomorrow in it. I remember, I have to look back my article, but yeah.
So this whole time she just keeps talking about not having the courage and not being like brave or not having the strength. But the whole time she's doing that. She's staying with Melanie. She's doing the right thing. She's asking someone to help her get to Tara to get out of the war. So she is that person, and she's going to have to struggle and she's going to have to fight for them.
And when they're on the road, she thinks through her mind, ran a few words of the song she had once sung with Rhett. She could not recall the rest, but she knows it says, just a few more days to tote the weary load. So she's humming, just a few more steps for to tote the weary load.
And they get home and she sees Tara and it's still standing and it's not burned down, and she's so happy about that. And Gerald comes out to meet her.
Yeah, she sees the shadow coming out of the house.
And he looks like an old man, and he says, you know, they talk for a while, and then he says, your mother died yesterday. Which is like, oh, she could have just gotten there a day sooner. So she gets inside, she gets to see her sisters who are still sick. And I thought it was interesting because it says in there that she says, doctors might say that fresh air was fatal in a sick room, which is totally opposite of how we feel about it now. Like we want people to get fresh air and sunshine. And
Right.
So that was interesting. So I forgot to say that they found a cow along the road.
Yes, very good.
And Prissy says, "Oh, that cow needs milk. That's
made
why
a funny
she's
sound.
like bawling or whatever."
Yeah.
But when they get home, someone tells them that the cow has actually had a calf, and so now they have milk for the baby.
Blessing. Yes, huge blessing.
So they get there. They're trying to figure out how to feed Melanie's baby. I'm like, how did the baby remain quiet all that time without eating? And
poor baby.
I mean, because newborn, like they're
fed
hungry and they need to be fed
constantly.
all. Yeah.
Yes.
So they decide that Dilsey is going to feed Melanie's baby because she's just had a baby too. So she has plenty of milk to feed both babies and doing it in tandem.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Which I also thought it was interesting that Melanie's baby's still not named at this point. We don't have a name for the baby.
Yeah.
And we've skipped over some times where Melanie's like, I won't think about that now, but she's starting to have to think about more things like we talked about. And she said, and when Ashley came home, if he did come home, no, she wouldn't think of that later too. So much to think of later.
Exactly.
Scarlett presses Mammy to find out what happened to her mother, Ellen. She didn't want to hear it from Gerald. And so she keeps asking Mammy, and she doesn't want to tell her.
Tell me the story. And she says no. And Dilsey starts to speak up.
Right.
And Mammy's like, no, you stop. Yeah.
But Dilsey does tell her, and I guess the gist of it is that Ellen dies calling out the name Philippe.
Yeah.
And so we're all left wondering who Philippe is.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing it was a love from years past or something.
She was young.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So we talked about Scarlett being like the strength, and one of the quotes was, knowing that Ellen's daughter would be the refuge Ellen had always been. So now that Ellen is gone and Gerald is like not in his right mind, not able to make any decisions, Scarlett has to step up and be that person. So we find out that the Yankees had used Tara as the headquarters, and that's how it had been spared.
Right. They didn't burn it down. I think Gerald had told them that the women were sick, and kind of persuaded them to just use it instead of destroying it. So that was good.
And they burned all the cotton, which is
terrible.
Like,
what did she say? $150,000 worth of cotton
back then.
Yeah, which is crazy. Yeah. So horrible.
Let's see. So she goes on and she's talking about how, someone like these family members could help me, but she decides, let's see.
She doesn't want to take charity from other people.
Right.
She wants to do it herself.
She says she was seeing things with new eyes, for somewhere along the road to Tara, she had left her girlhood behind her. She was no longer plastic clay, yielding imprint to each new experience. The clay had hardened, sometime in this indeterminate day, which had lasted 1,000 years. Tonight was the last time she would ever be ministered to as a child. She was a woman now, and youth was gone. So this is like
huge
turning point.
Like her mind completely just changed, in this time. She also talks about tomorrow. She says, oh, tomorrow she would fit the yoke about her neck. And I just really liked that. I was thinking of the Bible verse, in Matthew 11 verses 28, where it says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Thinking that we know to take on his burden, that's got to be easy, but she's taking on this yoke of everybody, of everything, instead of turning to the Lord. But I just like that, how the author said it that way, that getting the yoke about her neck.
And all this time she's, not praying, not expecting him to come through and be faithful, but all this time he's giving her the
Showing
strength.
her things, yes.
If she would just accept that and not just...
And push into him, then I feel like but he's definitely filling her up, because, she couldn't do it. Yeah.
So I really just enjoyed this chapter myself. Just, it's such a turning point for her, right? She's like a phoenix rising from the ashes. She's like, the war has changed her, and she gives thanks to her ancestors at the end just for all the strength that they've given, and just a lot from this. She's not a kid anymore.
Right.
So
Grown up.
wonder how Rhett will feel about that.
Yeah.
They come across each other again.
Right. I'm interested to see.
Chapter 25. So this is, Scarlett is beginning to think about all the things that she needs to do, how to get food, where to find, she's trying to give everybody orders.
What's left? Like, is there still stock here? Is the garden here? Like, it's just kind
asking
of assessing.
Assessing the situation and trying to figure out what she's going to do next, trying to get people to help her do the things.
Right.
And they're not wanting to help her. And I just thought this was funny. She says, she's frustrated with them, so she goes, "A small fiend with a pair of hot tweezers plucked behind Scarlett's eyeballs." I just felt like that was so
graphic.
I like it. It's very descriptive of being so frustrated.
Right.
Plucking my nerves.
Right.
Another thing she says is that she won't think of taxes. She'll think about that. She's not going to think about that because that's a man's business. And then she starts to go. She's going out now to look for food amongst other houses that have been, that there's nobody staying at those houses. There's nobody left. So she's going to see if their gardens have anything in them. Right. Or their slave homes always had a garden next to it, so she's going to look for those.
Right.
And she eats a radish because she's so hungry. And then she vomits because it's so strong.
Yeah.
And she's so tired. Like, she just is exhausted. And she says, it says, as she lay prostrate, too weak to fight off memories and worries, they rushed at her, circled about her like buzzards waiting for a death. No longer had she the strength to say, "I'll think of Mother and Pa and Ashley and all this ruin later. Yes, later when I can stand it." She could not stand it now, but she was thinking of them whether she willed it or not. The thoughts circled and swooped above her, dived down, and drove tearing claws and sharp beaks into her mind. For a timeless time, she lay still, her face in the dirt, the sun beating hotly upon her, remembering things and people who were dead, remembering a way of living that was gone forever, and looking upon the harsh vista of the dark future. She's just finally
finally letting it all sink in. She just lays there.
Not ignoring and pushing down her feelings, but just really letting herself feel something for a change.
Yeah, this is reality.
So.
So after she kind of gets out of that way, she realizes that all this is happening to her, and she says, all this is happening to her, Scarlett O'Hara, whom had never even raised her hand to pick up her discarded stockings from the floor, or to tie the laces of her slippers. Scarlett, whose little headaches and tempers had been coddled and catered to all her life. So she's just rocking her world, not even used to, picking up your stockings off the floor.
Yeah, right?
That's crazy. Okay, and then we come to this famous quote. There's this movie, which is called Shag, and it takes place, I guess it's the 50s?
Yeah.
But they're in South Carolina, so near Fort Sumter, kind of what they talked about at the beginning of this book, and they talk about, so they quote this book. I don't know if it's the book or the movie they're quoting, because I don't know when the movie came out. Anyway, in this, there's like this pageant. So they're at the beach. They're at the beach, and they're these great wild girls, and there's this pageant for like Miss something. I can't even remember. Yeah. But they have to. It's like a swimsuit, wear a swimsuit and do a little something, like a little talent. So this one girl's like, you should like do a dramatization, from Gone with the Wind. So she does. So this part from the book, when we got to it, we were both marked it as, the quote from Shag. So I'm just going to read it to you, because if you watch the movie, it's really good the way she does it. But she says, hunger gnawed at her empty stomach again, and she said aloud, as God is my witness, the Yankees aren't going to lick me. I'm going to live through this, and when it's over, I'm never going to be hungry again. No, nor any of my folks. If I have to steal or kill, as God is my witness, I'm never going to be hungry again. So she bites this potato in the movie. It's so funny. So Scarlett, though, is for real. Like, this is now what it's coming to. Like, it's food and how to get it. Like, this is what we're coming to. And she's got to feed all these people.
Right.
There's the slaves to feed. There's Melanie and the babies and all these people. So it's a lot for her to think of, and a lot of sickness in that house. I feel like to feed them, you want them to get well. Right. Anyway, so she's got a lot. So then she starts to feel bad for Wade, and I'm like, finally, she's talking about Wade and thinking about him, and she talks about these days Scarlett hardly thought of Wade as a person. He was only another worry, another mouth to feed, which is sad. Someday, when the present emergency was over, she would play with him and tell him stories and teach him his ABCs. But now she did not have the time or the soul or the inclination. But it's like she was thinking about him.
Yeah.
And thinking when there was time. Because I just felt like when she first had him, she just didn't even like him.
Right.
So I feel like now she's gotten...
She does care.
She does care. She deep down, there's a heart. And she talks about Wade living in fear. Like how he grew up, kind of in Atlanta, and all he had known was that. But then the Yankees come in and they're constantly saying, the Yankees are coming, the Yankees are coming. And then they're traveling away. And just this poor little boy has this trauma. I feel like he's going to have to... Like so many of them did, but from such a young age for him.
They had to be tough.
Yeah. She always says, be a little man, Wade, be a little man. Yeah. She says that a lot in the book, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're finding that the war has really changed Scarlett, and, she wasn't taught things. And so she gets kind of angry with her mother, like, you taught me to be gentle and kind and sweet and do all these things, but, like, that's not going to help me with my present situation.
Right.
Now it's survival right now.
Right.
And then, we're talking that this past week was 4th of July, and I wish that we'd read this before, because it would have been so nice to post on Instagram some of these quotes about freedom or the land, being worth fighting for. Right. So I'll read this part. When she looked at Tara, she could understand in part why wars were fought. Rhett was wrong when he said men fought wars for money. No, they fought for swelling acres, softly furrowed by the plow, for pastures green with stubby cropped grass, for lazy yellow rivers and white houses that were cool amid magnolias. These were the only things worth fighting for. The red earth which was theirs and would be their sons, the red earth which would bear cotton for their sons and their sons' sons. The trampled acres of Tara were all that was left to her, now that Mother and Ashley were gone. For 'tis the only thing in the world that lasts. But, I was saying earlier that I don't really agree that it's one thing worth fighting for, but it was... if we hadn't fought for this country,
right, the land
we wouldn't be here and have this. So, it does mean freedom, and it means freedom to worship as we please. So, there is something in that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Chapter 26. Okay, so she had been at Tara a couple of weeks now, still trying to do her best to get things done and see what else needed to be done. She talks about a stillness at Tara that was unbearable, for it reminded her of the death-like stillness of the desolate country. I always feel like they paint the scene of what it feels like, and you can kind of feel like what it would feel like to be there. So then she hears something, and she sees a Yankee with a long pistol on his hip riding up on a lone horse. So he's alone, but he's riding up, and she gets freaked out about that. And then she starts to think, well, if he comes, then maybe more could come and they could take our stuff, and we just got all, we have this cow and we have certain things now, and what if he takes all our stuff again? So she really freaks out, and she grabs that pistol of Charles that she had brought from Atlanta, and he comes in and he looks up and sees her, and he says, so there is somebody home. All alone, little lady, he says. And like lightning, she shoves her weapon over the banister and into the startled, bearded face. Before he could even fumble at his belt, she pulled the trigger and says he was dead. Undoubtedly, she had killed the man. Yeah. She just,
right in the face, first
Boom.
try.
I mean, just didn't even think. Just did it.
It's very graphic about what he looks like and
Yeah.
too.
With the blood coming, it's right there. Yeah. She had killed a man. She who took care never to be in at the kill on a hunt. She who could not bear the squealing of a hog at slaughter, the squeak of a rabbit in a snare. Murder, she thought dully. I've done murder. Oh, this can't be happening to me. But she felt like, in the end, it came to her, she had struck a blow of revenge for Tara and for Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as she's sitting there, with this body, what am I going to do? Melanie is in the hallway, and she looks up and sees Melanie's eyes. And Melanie had taken in this whole scene. In silence, her eyes met Scarlett's, and there was a glow of grim pride in her usually gentle face. And then Scarlett's thinking, she's like me. She understands how I feel. And Scarlett, in that long moment, she'd have done the same thing. So now she's feeling this. She's struggling against hatred for Ashley's wife, Melanie, and then there surged a feeling of admiration and camaraderie. She saw in a flash of clarity, untouched by any emotion, that beneath the gentle voice and the dove-like eyes of Melanie, there was a thin, flashing blade of unbreakable steel. Felt, too, that there were banners and bugles of courage in Melanie's quiet blood. So it's like a little turning point for their relationship, I feel like.
Just admiration for her now.
Mm-hmm.
She's doesn't feel quite as alone.
Right. So they're both so Melanie has this idea, okay, we need to hide him. We need to do something because if there's more coming and they see him here, that you've killed him, what's going to happen? So let's pull him out to the, outside and bury him. Well, Melanie is so weak. Yeah. Scarlett says, go, you can't do that. So Scarlett pulls him out there, and then she finds his wallet and his little knapsack stuff, and he has all these trinkets that he's probably stolen from other people that are worth money. And she finds greenbacks. Before this, she had started to go through Gerald's wallet and everything and had found nothing worth value. He only had Confederate money, which was nothing. But this guy had greenbacks, U.S. money, which was going to be worth something. So the Lord, she did note that the Lord had provided for them with this soldier that came.
Yeah. And the quote says, Scarlett was loath to put down the wallet. Bright vistas opened before her, real money, the Yankees' horse, food. There was a God after all, and he did provide, even if he did take a very odd way of providing. She sat on her haunches and stared at the wallet, smiling. Food. So it meant something.
And the horse meant, a way to get to places that had food,
And so now that they did have the horse, they could go, check on their neighbors and see how everybody else was faring. And so she decides to visit the Fontaines, and she catches up with the young ladies, and then she just can't she doesn't want to talk about Ellen, so she kind of just skips over that and doesn't mention anything about Ellen. And then Grandma Fontaine says, I need a private word with you. Would you come out and talk to me outside? So she takes her outside, and Grandma Fontaine just basically is like giving her advice, like, you can do this, be strong. Tells her a little bit about her life when she was in some kind of war and saw
the Indians took everything and they scalped her brothers and sisters and her mother.
Face.
Oh, horrible! Yeah.
So she's like, you can endure this. And Scarlett says, I thought if I could just get home to Mother, she could manage everything, and I could lay down the weary load. On the way home, I thought the worst had already happened to me, but when I knew she was dead, I knew what the worst really was. And then at the end of their conversation, Grandma Fontaine says, well, go home, child, or they'll be worrying about you, she said suddenly. Send pork with the wagon this afternoon, because they had I'm sorry, back food. Up. Yeah. They offered to give her some of what the food that they had so they could live. Yeah. And so she continues, and don't think you can lay down the load ever, because you can't. I know. But she just talks about just being strong and
very encouraging.
Not being afraid of anything anymore, and always.
I think that helped Scarlett. Just gave her kind of a renewed sense of, okay, it was good to talk to people too. Right. Like, well, there's people in there,
that aren't sick.
Yes, and I can talk and have a conversation and find some things up. So that was good.
Grandma also says, Scarlett, always save something to fear, even as you save something to love. So I thought that was interesting. And I guess at this point they're also talking about how there's work to be done and there's nobody else to
cotton to pick.
Right. And so nobody will do anything to help. It's just
there's no work. There's no
all above them.
The men that worked in the fields. There's no field hands left. There must have been hundreds of them, and they've all run away.
Right. So nobody to pick the cotton, and so Scarlett's gonna do it, and the only person she could get to help her is Dilsey, who then forces Prissy, her daughter, to do it too. Corrine says she will help, but then she's still sick, and she just can't make it. So
So
Scarlett picks like
out there picking
bushels
corn.
of cotton. So
in the sweltering heat. So she's pretty incredible.
the next chapter is 27, and this is when Sally Fontaine rides up wildly on her horse right at the beginning and says the Yankees are coming, and she doesn't even stop. She just comes straight towards the house, tells them on the front porch, and keeps going. And so Scarlett starts shooting out orders, hide all the food, the animals, do all this stuff, and she's left alone in the house with the babies and Wade.
Yes, Wade's like clutching to her, and she's holding the baby in her arms. And
she's telling Wade, like, go outside, like, go
run
find
back
outside,
to Mammy,
like, go find the other people down at the swamp, but he won't because he's afraid. But this is like a point where she does end up speaking a gentle word to Wade. Like she does end up saying, I don't remember what she says, but maybe her first time ever, she says something kind of like kind to him.
Yes. Gentle spirits. And then so they get there, the Yankees get there, and they're starting to come in, and they're going through everything. They're just destroying things and taking things, and all this that they've worked to get back to some normalcy, I feel like, is just going away. And before they got there, hold on, she has that wallet of money. And she's thinking, where do I put this? She thinks of the baby's diaper, so she puts it in the baby's diaper, and she's holding him. So, because she thinks if I put it inside myself, they'll want to look on me or something. So she puts it inside his diaper, so that is safe. But they go through everything, and they just steal what they can.
The sword and some other trinkets.
Some of the other trinkets that the soldier had on him.
They burn the cotton that's outside, and I just couldn't
That was so hard.
She doesn't talk about it much, but it kills me.
Devastating,
to think that
she just picked all that, and she would took it and I'm gonna do this, and then it's gone, just like that.
And they try to take the sword. She talks them out of taking the sword, and then in revenge of that, they set fire to the kitchen. They leave, and the kitchen's on fire, and she runs back there, gets a wet towel, and is trying to put the fire out, and then Melanie comes back to help her, save her, help her again.
And she ends up waking up from a fall or whatever, and she's laying on Melanie's lap out on the porch, and the fire's out, and they got it all out. But then Melanie, her calmness in the storm, she says, "We haven't lost each other, and our babies are all right, and we have a roof over our heads," said Melanie. And there was a lilt in her voice, and that's all anyone can hope for now. So it's like she still had some hope.
Right. And so now Scarlett has a greater respect for her sister-in-law and a closer feeling of camaraderie. And she says, I'll say this for her, she thought grudgingly, she always there when you need her.
Yeah. I like that renewed thing. All right. So that was a lot in that chapter, but now we're chapter 28. Yeah. Okay.
She talks again about how she's like Atlanta, and she takes more than Yankees are burning to keep me down. So she kind of references that again, like she did earlier.
They've got Yankees coming to stay at the house. They've got a whole, and so they take them all in and feed them, and let them stay there to get some rest. Yeah.
Well, these are Confederate soldiers.
I'm sorry, Confederate.
Right?
That's what I meant. I meant Confederate.
So Confederate soldiers are.
These are the good guys. All right, they're the guys that are on the south side. Sorry, the Confederates. So they can get some rest and replenish before they keep going.
And they end up seeing Mr. Kennedy, which was Sue Ellen's little bow or whatever. And he takes Scarlett aside and says, since Gerald's not really with it right now, could I have Sue Ellen's hand in marriage? And she agrees. So
and they have their moment. All right, 29. Okay, so this is a big moment. The Fontaine boys bring the news that the war is over. There's been a surrender. So kind of a sigh of relief.
Right. Scarlett uses this time to visit all the neighbors and is just sad about different stuff that's happened.
Yeah.
And then at the end, Kathleen comes and says that she's going to be marrying the overseer, and she's really unhappy about that, and everyone else is unhappy about that. But,
Yeah. So that was a short. That was the best part of that was just that the war is over, and that was the main.
Chapter 30. Will Benteen is introduced as a character. He is another soldier that is on his way home. You know, soldiers are just coming across, passing through, going home for months and months, it seems like.
Yeah.
And he shows up, and he ends up surviving. They take care of him, and they get him back to health. And he becomes a big integral part to the family, becomes one of the family.
Yes.
And Scarlett is very thankful that he is there because he has a brain about him about like taking care of the farm and doing the business dealings. And even though she's a good business person, he's really good too and can go and work with other businesses to, I don't know, how do you call that? Barter for things or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And so he's there and says that Will was a comfort to Scarlett.
Yes.
When everybody else is kind of nagging at her, he was just this steady presence, and you find out that all the people in the house have gone to talk to him about their various woes and things, so he knows everything about everyone.
Exactly.
And so it's Will was something the Lord had provided, and Scarlett often wondered how Tara could have lived through the last month without him.
Yeah. We find that there's a letter about Ashley's return, and what does it say? That one line that we only get basically from Melanie that she says over and over again throughout the chapter.
Beloved, I am coming home to you.
So there's just this excitement. It takes a long time though, because where was he? Ohio?
Illinois,
Illinois, and they're all the way in Georgia, so that's
and on foot.
a trek.
Right.
Yeah, so they didn't know how long it was going to take, but she just kind of kept repeating those words to herself to get herself through.
Which is like, he doesn't even belong to you. And Will ends up saying that to her, like, this is, this is Melanie's husband, not your husband. And
so when he does return, like they hear something, and Melanie's the one who sees him out the window, and then Scarlett. So Melanie runs, and then Scarlett is running, and Will stops her and holds her tight, like, no.
Yeah.
Like, this is not your moment.
Right.
Yeah. But I think I'm glad he was there.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't about her at that moment. It was about Melanie.
that could have been messy.
Very awkward.
So
that's what we
maybe
get.
even greater than the war being over is Ashley has come home.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking that it was a gift that Ashley was captured, because I thought if he had been in battle that whole time, he very well could have
died. That's true.
So because he was in prison,
he was safe, basically, in a different way, but safe. Yeah.
He could have had food. Like they talked about how in a Yankee prison they probably did have food. Even their meager rations were probably better than what the Confederate soldiers had.
Right, because they were better off than they were. Yeah, that's true.
So and that's how we end part 3.
Yes, excited for part 4. That was a lot.
Tried to make this one shorter, and
hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.